Hi everyone, my name's Jaden Bede, and welcome back to the Legal Intern Diaries Montana Edition, Episode 2. I'm so excited to be continuing on with this podcast series, and I am so excited to announce that our next episode, or even two-part episode, will be with Swazig, who is the pre-law advisor at the University of Montana. And she's going to be able to give some valuable insights into both chapters that we're going to be covering in today's episode. And so I wanted to make sure that I covered both topics in advance, that way you had some foundational knowledge before we meet with her and do that episode. That way you can completely focus on the insights and guidance that she has to offer. In this episode, we will be covering chapters 4 and 5 of my book, A Guide to Legal Internships in Montana. Again, if you have not yet, please go check out the book and read the content before the podcast episode. That way you have some insight. These podcast episodes are supposed to be supplemental to the guide content and follow the same outline. That way I can provide perspective and not have to cover every single thing that is already in there. If you have not yet been able to check it out, please go to www.406legalinternships.com. On this website, you can not only find my ebook, but you can also find all of the podcast episodes, as well as my other social media and any other resources that I have found to be useful or helpful. It's also a great way to get in contact with me using the Contact Me tab. So if you haven't yet, go check that out. Today, we will be covering chapters 4 and 5 of my ebook, A Guide to Legal Internships in Montana. If you have not yet read these two chapters, I recommend that you head on over to my website, www.406legalinternships.com, where the ebook is listed completely free of charge to you, and you can read ahead on these chapters prior to me going into them. Although my podcast does follow the same outline as the ebook, it does not cover all of the content in the ebook. This podcast episode is supposed to provide foundational knowledge and my perspective on navigating the application process and obtaining a legal internship and how to prepare for that. Let's hop right into it. Chapter 4 is navigating the application process. Now, in the last episode, we talked a little bit about research and how important it is to ensure that you not only have done your research and have foundational knowledge prior to pursuing an internship, but also understanding what types of law you may want to go into, which can help influence what firms you're looking for opportunities at. There are two different sectors of the law. There is both public and private, and these are very different. Obtaining an internship in whichever one of these you feel suits you best, or maybe even both if you want to try them out, is pivotal. The public sector is generally working for the government, and so this means usually being in a public defender's office or even a prosecutor's office. Now, the private sector is a little bit different, where there are many different types of attorneys along a vast amount of subcategories, as I touched on a little bit in episode 1. And so it is pivotal that you understand whether you want to engage in private sector work or public sector work. So make sure you do some research on what both of those two things mean, or go back and read the beginning of chapter 4, which talks a little bit about the differences between the two. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to be a private sector attorney and not public. Mainly the reason for this is so that I could choose my clients and choose what type of work I was doing down to the minute details. Now, this is not a luxury that most public attorneys have the luxury of being able to do. In my experience, it is also easier to obtain a legal internship in the private sector because there is just much more opportunity. The city in which you live, or even the surrounding ones, only has so many intern opportunities at the public level, whereas the private sector, there is many different firms. Let's look at Missoula, for example. There is a plethora of different firms covering an incredibly wide range of types of law. However, when you look to the public sector, there isn't as many opportunities in Missoula as there would be if you're looking at the private sector. So if you're looking to be in the public sector, it's really important that you do your research and you get in there early. That way you can obtain one of those opportunities. And if you're not sure which one you'd like, I would just try one. or do your research. If you're able to figure it out from just that, fantastic. But it is pivotal that you do your research first on what would be the best opportunity for you, and then try them out to know what you like before entering the workforce. We spoke about research a little bit in the last episode of this podcast. However, it's really important to decide what type of law you want to do. And by this, I don't mean whether you want to be criminal, civil, or otherwise. I mean, do you want to practice in the private sector or in the public sector? Both are very different worlds, and I encourage you to go back and read chapter 4, the beginning of chapter 4 of my ebook, in order to kind of distinguish between the two. It's important that you understand the differences between them, because your job and your duties will look very different dependent on. And so whichever one aligns with your values more closely and allows you to have the opportunities that you need to learn. Now, let's talk a little bit about my experience. In my experience, I always knew that I wanted to be a private sector attorney, and so it didn't take me much thought to know that I needed to research internship opportunities in the private sector, not state-sponsored, or in the public sector. However, this may not be the case for you. You may know right off the bat that you want to do public sector work, or maybe you have no idea. So it's important that you understand what the differences are between public and private sector attorneys, what they do, what opportunities they have, the types of law that you could engage in when you're in them, and then go from there when choosing an internship opportunity or a firm to work for. Once you've decided both what type of attorney you want to be, public or private sector, and then what type of law or what types of law you're looking to practice, or what kind of attorney you're looking to be, as discussed in the prior episode, then you can focus on obtaining an internship opportunity. Again, research is a big component of all of the steps and is definitely a theme throughout the entire ebook. You really want to be very organized and ensure that your research is effective. This includes being timely. Ensuring that you start your research on what type of internship and where you could possibly obtain an internship needs to start quite a while before you're looking to actually start your internship, because you never know how long it will take you to find an opportunity, go through the application process, and then actually start working for them. If you're looking to obtain a legal internship this coming summer, being summer of 2025, I would recommend starting now. Starting at least 6 months before you are looking to start your job allows you the time to effectively research what opportunities are out there in your community, leverage their benefits against each other, do a pro-con list if that's how you make your decisions, and ultimately then apply and go through that application process. It's also really important that you keep notes or are very organized with what research it's really important that you're organized and keep track of deadlines for any firm that you are looking to apply to. If you miss the application deadline, that could be problematic and potentially stifle your opportunities. So keeping track of them is very important. And there's also something to be said of being early. I definitely think that an employer respects when someone is eager to apply prior to a deadline, or as soon as an application process even opens. Depends on the firm and depends on the hiring committee, but all of which are considerations you should be making and require you to be able to do so quite a bit in advance. So make sure that you're keeping track of deadlines and that you're staying on top of your research for those different internship opportunities, regardless of where you're looking. The next section that we need to talk about when navigating the application process is preparing your materials for your application. And we went over this a little bit in the last episode. However, in this episode, we're going to be going a little bit more in depth. I also think it's important to note that at the end of the ebook, I have examples of all the different types of application materials that I think you could need. However, this doesn't mean that there won't be other types. And so doing your own research and making sure that throughout that application process, or even the prior research that goes into it, you know what materials they're asking you for and have time to research and see what components could be involved in that and how you can best execute those materials for your application. Make sure that all of your application materials are up to date and contain relevant information for the internship that you're pursuing. Although I think that there are many different components that are important and that are individualized to the applicant, which again, you can go take a look at the book for a bulleted list of some different ones that I think are particularly consistent and important. Firm to firm, regardless of being public, private sector, or any of the different types of law. But one thing that is for sure is that you need to make sure that your application materials are up to date and that they do not contain information that doesn't matter to those reviewing it. Not only would you be wasting the attorney's time by not having relevant information, but you'd be wasting your own. An attorney is only going to spend so much time, or a hiring committee is only going to spend so much time reviewing your application. So making sure that everything on there counts is important. Additionally, I know I talked about this in the last episode, but I cannot express how important it is to have a tailored cover letter attached to your resume. And if you're not sure what a cover letter is, go check out the ebook in those last pages and you'll see an example of mine. A cover letter is meant to explain why you're interested in the job and why they should hire you beyond just your accolades that are expressed in your resume or your writing sample. In my cover letter, I remember that I wrote about how I have always loved argumentation and how fascinating I find the art of negotiation, and that was because of various backgrounds that I had. And then I went on to explain why, because of those things, I would be a great fit. And I also was able to work in some examples that articulated that I am a kind, caring, compassionate, and genuine individual. I made sure that my cover letter was authentic and not scripted. And overall, it's supposed to communicate who you are as a person. And so just remember that. But it also doesn't need to be your entire life story. Having an adequate balance is also important. Depending on what application materials a firm is requiring, you probably need to start gathering them a little bit in advance. I would recommend giving yourself at least a month, if possible. Obviously, when you come across an opportunity, you don't get to control the deadline. But looking for opportunities at least 6 months in advance should likely give you at least a little bit more time than we would have had if you're looking 2 weeks before the application deadline. The reason that I say this is because some application materials are going to take you a while to obtain. Although some are on you, like writing a cover letter, which could take you, dependent on the person, depending on how motivated you are, and depending on how much research you've done into the firm, could take you, not much time at all, or it could take you a really long time if you're super methodical. You want to make sure that you have time to do all of the above. However, there are other types of documents that a firm may require that you have no control over how long it takes to obtain them. This includes a transcript. Although I personally wasn't asked for my official transcript or unofficial transcript, I know a lot of firms do. And this is definitely part of a standard application requirement for anything. And so ensuring that you have the time to obtain that is important. I know that at the University of Montana, it can take 10 to 14 days in order to obtain that official transcript. And so if I were to apply or be trying to apply 7 days before the deadline, and I hadn't requested it yet, I might be in some trouble. So ensuring that you're keeping track of not only the application deadlines, like I said before, but you're also ensuring that you have prepared all necessary application materials in enough advance that you can have them all perfectly tailored and ready to go by the time you're ready to apply or that deadline rolls around. Now, I can go more in depth into any of these things. However, I think that most of your questions would likely be answered by the book content in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, and at the end of the book where I have those example materials. If not, and you have more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, you can go to www.406legalinternships.com. If you go to the Contact Us tab, it'll shoot me an email with your message, and I not only could reply to you individually, or it may be something that many people are wondering and I can work into another one of my podcasts or even a social media post. And that reminds me, I have a TikTok and an Instagram account. Both are called 406 Legal Internships. This is also a great way to get a hold of me. Shoot me a DM if that's what's easiest for you. I'm happy to answer any question that you have, and it may be a question that many are wondering about. So it may be something that I should work into my next podcast or clarify in materials and resources on my website. Let's move on to networking opportunities. And this is something that I'm very passionate about. But like I talked about in the last podcast episode, networking opportunities don't just fall into your lap. There's something that you have to work for. Networking opportunities can be incredibly valuable, but you have to make them that. Not only do you have to do the legwork in order to find them and attend them, but you also need to do the legwork of finding those networks once you attend them, and then establishing those relationships and continuing them thereafter. This is not something that anyone is going to sustain for you, and so making sure that you have the drive and the commitment to do so is really important and will take you a lot further than if you were to not do those things. Now, is networking a requirement to obtain a legal internship? No, but it sure could make it a heck of a lot easier. There are some different avenues that I explain in the book in this chapter of how to possibly find a networking opportunity. I'm not going to go over those because that's something that you've either already read, or if you haven't yet, I encourage you to go check it out. However, LinkedIn is always a fantastic resource to find networking opportunities. Oftentimes law schools put them on. Here in Montana, really the main law school is at the University of Montana, the Blewett School of Law, and I know that they put on a ton of networking opportunities throughout the year, and so checking their social media or even getting in contact with their admissions department could really provide some great networking opportunities too. So I encourage you to check those out if you're kind of looking for an avenue to start in. Let's talk a little bit about what I did in order to find networking opportunities. Now, admittedly, I didn't do a ton of it, and I look back and I wish I had done more, because now I think that I could have created a lot of connections that I now have established through my internship a lot earlier, which would have provided a lot of further opportunity and aid in my current position. I definitely encourage you to leverage any school relationships that you have. They can be great references. They possibly know someone in the community. I mean, we live in Montana and everybody knows somebody. And so if you leverage the relationships that you've created in your undergrad, you may be able to find opportunities that way. A lot of connections could get you, that you already have established, could probably get you pretty far. And if not, someone may be able to point you in the right direction. I know for me, I leveraged my relationship with Swazig, who is our pre-law advisor, in order to get very meaningful guidance on every part of the law school application process. And I know that if I had still been looking for a legal internship at the time, she likely would have been able to provide me some guidance or some contacts had I needed them. And MSU also has a pre-law advising department, and although I can't speak to theirs because I don't attend school there, what I can tell you is that I'm sure that they have contacts too. And so that's always a great place to start, and that's just one example of leveraging a school connection in order to possibly help you obtain a legal internship. Again, I encourage you to attend public events from law firms or from the law school here in Missoula. Although, depending on where you are in the state, this may be something that's difficult to routinely do, and I totally understand. There's a lot of miles to cover between here and a lot of the state. However, I think that these could be pivotal. And so doing your research to see if it's worth it to do that travel or to attend is probably something that you want to take into consideration, but I definitely don't think that you would regret attending any networking opportunity. With that said though, if you just attend and you don't talk to anybody and you leave, it probably won't be worth it. And so that goes back to you making it something. You have to take the bull by the horns, and you have to be the one who leverages that opportunity into a success. And so making sure that you're talking to as many people as you can, introducing yourself, making a good impression is really important to that end. Another way to find connections is just to cold call. And by that, no, I don't mean that you should literally call random people, because that probably isn't an efficient use of your time. What I mean by that is just start adding people on LinkedIn. Just start following people on Instagram. Leverage your social media platforms. They are widely utilized and monitored by local law firms or even by government organizations if you're looking to go into the public sector. You also can call offices and see if there is any opportunity for you to gain insight into that law firm, and you can call them and ask if they happen to have any opportunities opening in the near future for an intern. See what kind of law they practice, see what kind of opportunities they offer their interns. Those are things that you can do and you shouldn't be afraid to do. Also, don't be afraid to call the law school. They have amazing people that work in all different departments and would be happy to answer your questions, especially the admissions department. And so I definitely encourage you, if you have a specific question, to reach out to them. Leverage all of those different connections that you can find. Although it's not easy, it definitely will pay off in the long run if you take advantage of all the networking opportunities that you can. Let's talk a little bit about preparing for your interview. Now, chapter 5 is specifically discussing how to ace your interview, and this is just a little bit different, but still all the more important. Again, it is pivotal that you research different law firms and understand what opportunities they can provide you. That way you know if that is somewhere that you would like to obtain a legal internship, and then you can start putting your efforts into that firm in order to obtain one. Now, I also don't recommend that you put all of your eggs in one basket, so make sure you're being diversified in your research and in your internship search. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment, but it's really important that you practice when it comes to preparing for your interview. Now, I know that this sounds kind of silly and some people may feel awkward or odd about practicing in a mirror, so to speak, but it is something that actually makes a lot of difference. If your responses are well tailored and you're confident in them, that will convey in your interview and will be something that is highly regarded by any interview or hiring committee. It can be helpful to have practice interview questions, and I have some in chapter 5 of the book, which I will talk about in a moment, that you can review and kind of write out some answers to and see how you would answer them. It also could be helpful to you to do a mock interview with a mentor, possibly an advisor, or even a friend. Practicing your answers to the questions and using all of those tools that you have in your toolbox, being the experiences that you've had and all of the content, skills, and qualities that you've conveyed in your application materials, is very important, because you may have the most fantastic resume in the world, but if you don't know how to sell yourself and communicate all of those skills in an effective way to the attorneys in that interview, you will not get the job. With that said, it's important that you have examples ready for everything contained in your application materials. This is a piece of advice that I don't hear given a lot. However, attorneys are going to look for, or a hiring committee is going to look for, your ability to showcase that you have a certain skill or quality or ability. They don't want you to tell them, they want you to show them. Anyone can say that they're a hard worker. Anyone can say that they can do this, that, and the other, but not everyone can show it, because not everyone can do it. So you need to remember that and have that in the back of your mind. For every single skill, for every single characteristic, quality, or otherwise that is present on your application materials, make sure that you have a positive experience that is likely not a long-winded response or story, but is a shorter version that you can convey to that hiring committee or attorney how you exemplify that skill, or even how you came to obtain it, dependent on what it is you're talking about. Let's talk about crafting your cover letter, your portfolio, and your resume. Now, I don't talk a lot about the portfolio in the last episode, nor will I in this one, because it's not something that I see often required by law firms in Montana for their interns. However, it is something that's possible, so I recommend that you go check out the book and have something along those lines ready just in case they do. I'm saving a lot of this content for the book, because there's no reason for me to walk you through step by step on the podcast as opposed to giving you my perspective when it's written out for you in my free ebook resource. And so I recommend that you go check out page 26 of the ebook. Again, you can find that at www.406legalinternships.com. The most important thing that you need to remember about all of these materials is that you're supposed to show who you are. Showcase your passion for the law and why you are a great candidate for this position and why that firm would be lucky to have you. They need to see what value you would add the firm, because they know they're going to add value to you, but what can you do for them? Also showing how all of that aligns with a firm's values and brand is super important. And so making sure that through that research that I talked about a moment ago about internship opportunities, that you're also ensuring that your values align with that firm's values and that you know how to articulate that throughout your interview process and through your application materials. Let's talk a little bit about my experience with my application materials. I didn't start out as a legal intern, and that's part of why I decided to create these free resources in the first place. The way that I found to get my foot in the door was actually by being a marketing intern. A local firm, Reed Bell & Jasper here in Missoula, needed someone to manage primarily their social media and their website. Thus, as a marketing business major in my undergrad, I thought that this would be a great way to get my foot in the door, and it was. But the main reason I chose that avenue is because I didn't have many resources to help coach me on obtaining a legal internship in a different way. With that said, when I applied for my marketing internship, I did all of the same things that I now know that we ask of our legal interns. Although the attorneys may have been looking for a little bit different content in my application materials given the nature of my work at the time, the application materials themselves are the same. First, I was asked for my resume, and I ensured that my resume was short and sweet and only contained experiences, skills, or anything else that was relevant to the position itself. My resume was short and sweet, easy to read, and contained only those experiences that were pertinent to the job I was applying for. Now, my cover letter is a little bit of a different story. I look back at my cover letter and I think that I probably was a little bit long-winded in it. However, I definitely was able to convey the type of person I was, the passion that I had, and why I thought I would be a fantastic candidate for this position. And that included pieces of the brand's values that I had been able to find across their social media as it stood and on their website. So I definitely recommend that you do the same. I think that this cover letter was ultimately the most intriguing part of my application to the attorneys. Then when I interviewed, I was able to expand on all of my application materials through showing them that I had various skills, experiences that would aid me in the position and ultimately bring value to the firm. Now that was chapter 4. And again, admittedly, that was a little bit of a streamlined version. Hopefully when we speak with Soa Zieg, she'll be able to give a little bit more tailored advice to each of these different pieces of the application process. Now let's move on. Chapter 5, ace your interviews. I think that interview prep is possibly the most important part of obtaining a legal internship. Now, I know I say a lot of different parts are important, but ultimately, if you do everything that we've already talked about and you get to the point where you have an interview, they're interested in you. They are. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given the time out of their busy schedules to interview you. They wouldn't have. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean that you should feel all the pressure in the world. They think you're qualified if they're giving you an interview based on your other application materials. And so showing that isn't something you need to do, but showing them who you are, being confident, and proving to them why you bring value to the firm and providing real human authentic context to your application materials is super important. And that is how you ace your interview. But that doesn't come without preparation though. No one is perfect right off the bat. And even if you're someone who can fly off the cuff and do pretty well, I think you would look back and wish that you had been a little bit more tailored and curated the tools in your toolbox in order to use it for specific questions and truly showcase the best version of yourself that you could to the attorneys. It's important that you review all of your preparation material. It's important that you review all of the application materials that you've prepped and make sure that you understand and know and remember what's there and what you've applied with. Because if you start talking about an experience that is not on your resume, it could bring up some red flags. And so it's important that you know what experiences you've laid out or information you've laid out for the firm that you're applying to, and that you stick to those things in your interview. Everything included on your application materials should be seen as a tool in your toolbox. Every skill, every experience, or otherwise. I like to frame it this way because different tools are suited towards different questions, and you may be able to use the same tool for every question, or you may need a mix of all of the above. But ensuring that you know what tools are in your toolbox and when it's appropriate to use them is super important. Meaning that it's super important that you understand what skills and characteristics and qualities you've outlined in your application materials, and that you know how to speak to them effectively and convey how they have an impact on the type of employee you would be at that law firm. I also want to back up to the last podcast where I provided some foundational knowledge just about the Montana legal system in general, and I think that that cross applies here as well. If you don't know that foundational information and the hiring committee, whomever it's made up of, gives you a scenario and you don't use proper terminology, that's going to be a red flag to them. Now, do they expect you to be perfect? No, you're applying for the legal internship for a reason. So don't stress out too much about it. But if you show that you have that foundational knowledge, they will see you as a turnkey intern and more valuable than your competition as a result. So again, if you haven't yet, go check out that last podcast where I explain that a little bit more in depth. It's also really important that you're ready for all different types of questions and possible scenarios. I go over some of this in the book. However, I think that the most effective way is practice. Come up with a bunch of different common interview questions, whether you search it on Google or you have an AI software like ChatGPT come up with it for you. These are things that I often do in order to come up with a bunch of different common interview questions. However, you also have to be prepared for those that aren't common and that you couldn't probably have prepared for, like various scenarios or very pointed questions. And again, this goes back to the preparation that you've done in getting to know your application materials and ensuring that you're leveraging all of the skills that you can in your application and answer to that question. Let's talk a little bit about your tools in your toolbox. Your tools in your toolbox will, and if you know how to use them properly, it will allow you to fix anything. Let's talk a little bit about my analogy of your tools in your toolbox. I know this may seem a little bit silly, but truth be told, if you have all of the different tools in your toolbox that you need, that only helps you if you know how and when to use them. And I think that this directly applies to your application materials and the experiences and qualities that you've conveyed through them. If you do not know how to properly answer a question or a given scenario using the things that you've communicated or the experiences that you've had in an effective way to whoever is on the hiring committee or conducting your interview, you likely will not get that position. Whether you've done all of the proper legwork to have a great foundation or not, if you don't know how to use the tool, you won't be able to fix whatever's broken, and thus you won't be able to provide value. Thus, it's important that you know what tools are in your toolbox, how to use them, and in what context you should be using them. For example, if an attorney gives you a scenario, right off the bat, you should know various experiences that you have showcased and can further in your interview, in your answer to that scenario. This allows you to present yourself effectively. Using key examples and having organized materials is also a big part of this. Not only do you want your application materials to be very organized, simple, and streamlined, but you want to make sure that your answers to questions are as well. And a big part of this is being confident and practicing your delivery. Practice really does make perfect. The more you talk about the skills and qualities you have, and the more you talk and remember stories and experiences that you've had that convey all of those different things, the easier it will be to cross-apply them to any question or scenario that the hiring committee throws at you. It's also really important that you show enthusiasm throughout the interview, that you're very excited for even the opportunity to interview, let alone to have a position at their firm. Now, this doesn't mean being overly that way, because it will come off as inauthentic. But the truth is that I'm sure if you're watching this right now, you really are concerned about getting a quality legal internship. And so anywhere that you apply, if you've done your research, is probably going to be able to provide that to you. And so conveying how grateful you feel to be there and how excited you are for the opportunity in an authentic manner to you, which is different for every person, is super important to them understanding the type of person you are. If you seem disinterested or even a little standoffish, whether that's because of stress or something else, you may not be chosen over someone who's a little more charismatic. And so don't let that be the reason you don't get your internship. Be as enthusiastic as you are about getting that internship or the opportunity to obtain it. It's also important that you come with some good questions to ask at the end. I think this is a very important part of an interview that some people overlook. I know that I am personally impressed when someone comes with great questions that are not just your standard run-of-the-mill ones that everyone asks or just a random one that they came up with on the spot. I think showing that you have truly methodically thought about it and are genuinely curious about something shows that you have put in the effort and that you really want that job and that you really want an internship at that firm or organization. An example of a question that you could ask that is a more run-of-the-mill question is the timeline. Now, the reason that I say this is an important question and one that I always ask is because it shows that you're interested and that you're organized and you want to make sure that you're on top of things, which are all fantastic qualities for any law firm or government office that is looking to hire you. And so asking about the timeline, writing it down, taking notes, and sticking to that timeline are all very important. It's also important and should be something that I don't even have to say, but I'm going to just in case. You need to dress for success and make sure that you're utilizing proper etiquette. It's very possible that your interview will be on Zoom. I know that mine was, so I actually dressed like I am right now, not in this exact same outfit, but I had a blouse and a blazer, and then I actually was wearing sweatpants, which was totally acceptable because it was on Zoom. However, had it been in person, that wouldn't have been something that was acceptable. You want to make sure that you're dressing for success and not only conveying that you have the professionalism standard for their office, whatever that looks like, but you also want to showcase that you cared enough to dress professionally and that you really do care about that opportunity. The way that you dress can convey just as much about yourself, your work ethic, and the person you are as the content, skills, and quality that you're sharing in the interview. It's also important that you're using your proper manners and using etiquette, especially if your interview is in person. On Zoom, this is a little bit different and maybe a little harder, and if you want me to get into the differences between an interview on Zoom and an interview in person, definitely let me know. But for now, I'm not going to get into that. But in-person etiquette are super important. And so go check out some common etiquette that you should know. However, I would argue that it's not much different than anything you would expect. And so I wouldn't be too stressed out about it. But just in case, in the book, I have pointed out a few different parts of interview etiquette that you should be aware of. Another important piece of acing your interview is following up. Now, this is not an opinion that is shared by all. Some people feel that you should just wait and not follow up. Now, I disagree with that. I think that within the first 24 hours of your interview, you should follow up and thank them for the opportunity in whatever capacity you set up the interview, likely over email or even a phone call to the firm, just thanking them for the opportunity and that you're looking forward to hearing from them. I mean, it doesn't need to be some long drawn out anything, but just making sure that they know that you are super interested and enthusiastic about this opportunity, and thanking them for the opportunity is likely something they'll appreciate. It's something that I did, and I heard back pretty close after that. And that could have just been because of the turnaround time at my firm, which varies based on what position you're applying to where, but it is a good way to poke them and just remind them that you're interested. Now, like I mentioned a minute ago, a great question that I think you should always be asking at the end of the interview is about the timeline. And then once you've established the timeline, then you can establish when you should follow up. If they say you should hear within 2 weeks, If you haven't heard within 2 weeks, it's always acceptable to reach out to them and just let them know that you're checking in, that there's no pressure, but that you just wanted to make sure you didn't miss something or you didn't miss an email. Just kind of bumping them, because things do get lost in the shuffle. Law firms are incredibly busy, and sometimes things come up and they may have just forgotten to reach out to you. Or it could be a miscommunication, or it really truly could be that you didn't hear back from them because it went to your spam folder. And so keeping track of this timeline and following up again is conveying that enthusiasm and your excitement for that opportunity and that you truly want it. But it also can kind of help you be a little bit more organized and stay on track in getting that internship in a timely manner as well, because obviously there may be some time constraints for you too. And so following up allows you to be in the know a little bit more than you would have in order to adhere to all of those different things. Now, this is not something that I necessarily encourage unless it comes up organically, but asking for feedback from a firm, especially if you didn't get a position, can be really valuable to you in your internship search. I think that it's always okay to ask for feedback if you are turned away. I think that if you are hired, that may not be something that comes up as organically, but down the road, it would be totally acceptable for you to ask what your strengths and what your weaknesses were in that interview. I definitely think, again, that this applies more towards if you didn't get it and kind of trying to figure out why. That way you can better yourself for your next interview than it would if you actually got it, because then it's not as relevant, at least not at that immediate moment. And so I definitely think that reflection and feedback are important parts, but I don't think that that requires you getting the feedback from the firm itself. I think that you could do some reflection, just knowing what you know about acing your interviews from this podcast and likely other resources that you're using. However, at the same time, I think that feedback direct from the source is particularly valuable. And so if you're able, I think that that's a great avenue for reflection, for bettering yourself and your interview just style, or even your application materials themselves for the future. Also, something that I didn't talk about earlier is that you should always be having peers or mentors review all of your application materials and give you feedback on them. Feedback is a critical part of your entire journey to becoming an attorney, I would say, like getting feedback on your law school application, getting feedback on your application for internships, getting feedback on your work, on your work product that you did in those internships in order to better yourself for law school, or getting feedback in law school in order to better yourself for when you become an attorney, all of which is contingent on feedback. And so make sure that you're open to feedback and that you're actively seeking feedback, because how are you supposed to get better if you don't know what you did wrong? Some common interview questions, as I spoke about earlier, can be found on page 30. And again, at the end of the book are those various example materials that I definitely encourage you to go check out, or use various platforms in order to find similar. This can include ChatGPT, this can include the internet, this can include using your pre-law advisor, which would probably be the first one I would reach out to if I were you, because they definitely would know, especially in the context of Montana and our law school here, if you're looking to attend law school here or practice here. But I also think that those other methods are particularly useful as well. Like I said, I use ChatGPT to generate potential interview questions all the time. If you don't get anything else out of this podcast, this is the most important thing. Be yourself and be confident. I know that that sounds super cheesy and super cliche, but it's true. If you don't believe in yourself and you're not confident in the things that you're saying or in your ability to obtain that internship, that's going to come across in the interview. And let me tell you, attorneys literally do that for a living, is sniff out people who are unconfident or have something to hide or otherwise. You will not get the internship if you are not confident in yourself. I think that your confidence is as important as any other piece of your application or interview. So be yourself. You wouldn't be there if you didn't have the skills or the background or the tools to obtain the internship. So own it. Be yourself and be authentic. I know that in my experience with any interview or application for anything that I've ever done, I've always tried to ensure that I am sticking to my values and conveying myself as an authentic person. And part of the reason that I do that is because I want them to hire me for me, not some false sense of me that I've either accidentally or on purpose perpetuated, but also because then I can feel good about it at the end of the day, regardless of the outcome. I know that I gave it my all and that I was who I was. And so if I get it, awesome. If I don't, then I knew I did everything that I could. Because the worst feeling in the world is feeling like you didn't do enough and regretting parts of the lead up to that interview or application submission or anything else. The track to law school and beyond is hard, and it's something that you need to be paying close attention to and has only marginal room for error. And so ensuring that you're authentic to yourself in all aspects of that can help minimize how you feel about it later, and likely will help you in the long run. Like I said, being authentic and confident will convey in your application material, in your interview, and will come across positively to whomever you're engaging with. Thus, even though I advocate for you to prepare and for you to know what tools are in your toolbox and how to use them, also being true to yourself is just as important as any of those things. So be authentic. I know that I was, and looking back now, I'm so glad that I did, because I don't think that I would have gotten this far had I not been. So it truly is super important. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications in order to be notified of every time I upload a new podcast. And you're especially going to want to check out our next podcast when I sit down and speak with Swazig, who is the pre-law advisor at the University of Montana and is going to provide valuable insights on the chapters we covered in today's episode. Thanks again. See you next time.